A man was driving home from work at around 1:30 in the morning. The roads were empty. He took the same route every night, a long stretch of highway outside the city, the kind of road lined with closed petrol stations and patches of dark trees, where you could drive for 10 minutes without seeing another pair of headlights. He knew every bend, every landmark, it was routine. He stopped at the red light at an empty intersection and sat waiting in silence. Then someone knocked hard on the passenger window. He spun around. Standing outside the car was a tall man in a dark jacket. The stranger wasn't threatening, wasn't shouting. He was just standing there, pointing back down the road behind him, his lips moving through the glass. The driver cracked the window. "Someone is in your back seat," the man said quietly. The driver immediately looked in the rearview mirror. Nothing, just the empty back seat. When he looked back at the window, the man was already walking away, disappearing in the dark at the edge of the road. The light turned green. The driver sat there for a moment, telling himself it was a prank, and then laughed nervously and drove on. But something wouldn't let him relax. Every time he checked the mirror, he found himself looking longer than he needed to. Not because he saw something, but because his eyes kept trying to focus on something, like his brain was registering a shape that his conscious mind refused to confirm. He kept his eyes on the road. Then he noticed the headrest. The rear seat headrest directly behind him had tilted forward slightly. He was certain it had been upright when he left work. He was certain of it. His phone rang through the car speakers. Unknown number. He answered without thinking. Static, several long seconds of nothing but white noises. And then, just barely audible beneath it, a voice, a whisper, 3 words. "He can see you now." The call went dead, and at the exact moment the back seat shifted. Not a loud noise, not a dramatic, just the soft, unmistakable sound of weight pressing down into leather. He stood on the brakes in the middle of the road, jumped out of the car and stood on the asphalt breathing hard, staring through the window. The back seat looked empty. The car sat silent and still under the night sky. But one thing was wrong. The interior dome light was on. He had never turned it on. And the seat cushion directly behind the driver's position looked slightly compressed, like someone had been sitting there and had only just left. He called his brother and waited on roadside until he arrived. He would not get back in the car alone. They returned together the next morning. No signs of a break-in, no footprints, nothing missing, nothing visible out of place. But his brother found something before they drove away. On the rear passenger window, on the side of the glass, there was fingerprints. 4 long streaks, like someone had slowly dragged their fingers down the window, not to get in, but to look out. The driver sold the car 2 weeks later. He still avoids that intersection at night, not because of the call, not because of the headrest or the sound from the back seat, but because of the man at the traffic light, a stranger who appeared from nowhere in an empty road at 1 in the morning and somehow already knew to tell him to look behind him before anything had happened at all. A delivery driver was heading home late at night after finishing his last run of the shift. He was cutting through a dead industrial area on the edge of the city, the kind of place that feels wrong even in daylight. Old warehouses with broken windows, empty lots swallowed by weeds, buildings that hadn't seen a working light bulb in years. There was no other vehicle on the road, no pedestrians, no sign of life anywhere. And then, without warning, his bike started losing power. Not dying completely, just struggling. dragging, like something invisible had reached into the engine and was slowly squeezing the life out of it. He pulled over and cut the engine, checking the gauges, trying to figure out what was wrong. His phone had no signal. He was completely alone. That's when he noticed the light. It was moving inside one of the abandoned buildings across the road, a slow, steady glow drifting from one upstairs window to the next, like someone walking through a dark room with a torch. He stared at it. The building had been empty for years. Everyone in the area knew that, and yet there it was, the light, moving with a calm, unhurried purpose that made his stomach drop. He watched it for a few seconds, then the light stopped. It sat motionless in one window, just long enough for him to wonder what he was looking at. And then it went out completely. He did not wait around to think about it. He started the bike and it worked perfectly. Full power, like nothing had ever been wrong. He pulled back onto the road and told himself it was nothing. A torch, a perfectly reasonable explanation. But as he pulled away, he glanced into his mirror. There was a figure standing at the entrance of the building, completely still, no movement, just a dark shape standing at the threshold, staring directly at him as he drove away. He couldn't make out a face or a clothing or any other detail, just a shadow watching him go. He drove home without stopping, but it was later, much later, when he was lying in bed trying to sleep, that the detail hit him, the one that still bothers him to this day. When his bike first lost power, before he even noticed the light in the building, he had already felt it, that feeling on the back of his neck, that pull, the sensation that something behind him was watching him. He had brushed it off, focused on the engine, told himself his nerves were just getting the better of him. But here's the thing, the abandoned building had been directly behind him the entire time. Whatever was standing in the darkness, whatever had been moving between those windows, it had been staring at him from the upper floor long before he ever thought to look. He noticed the light, but it noticed him first. A school teacher was walking home late at night after visiting a colleague. The route took him through one of the oldest parts of town, the kind of neighborhood that had never quite been renovated, where the streets were narrow and the walls pressed in close on both sides. There were almost no working street lights. Most of the light came from the moon, and even that was thin. He had walked this route many times before, and it had never bothered him. That night was different. He was maybe halfway through when he noticed her, a woman sitting on the ground ahead of him. Her back against the wall, perfectly still. She wasn't injured, wasn't distressed, wasn't doing anything at all. Just sitting there in the dark, waiting. He slowed down and asked if she was all right. She looked up at him. Calm eyes, steady expression, not the face of someone who needed help. Then she said quietly, "I'm waiting for someone." Nothing about her voice was strange, nothing about her manner raised any alarm. So he nodded and accepted the answer and walked past her. The moment he passed, everything changed. The air went heavy, not cold exactly, but thick, like the atmosphere itself had shifted. And with every step he took, a certainty grew in the back of his mind. Slow, creepy, undeniable. She was directly behind him, not following at a distance, not walking a few paces back, directly behind him, close enough to breathe on his neck. He spun around, The lane was empty. Not just empty of her, empty of everything. No movement, no shadow, no retreating footsteps. Just a straight, narrow corridor of darkness with tall walls on both sides. And nowhere, absolutely nowhere, that a person could have gone in the 2 seconds his back was turned. No doorway, no corners, no gaps in the walls. He stood there for a moment in the silence, and he says it was the silence itself that got to him. Not quiet, not peaceful, heavy, like the air was holding its breath, like something was still there, just beyond the edges of what he could see, watching him stand there alone. He avoided that lane for months. When he finally went back in broad daylight with people around, he noticed something he had never seen before on the wall in the exact same spot where the woman had been sitting. There was an old marking, faded almost to nothing, but still visible if you knew to look. He asked an elderly woman about it. She told him those markings were an old tradition. They were placed on the wall where someone had died, not where they were buried, just where they were remembered. A way of marking the place where a life had ended. She told him those markings were an old tradition. They were placed on the wall where someone had died, not where they were buried, just where they were remembered. A way of marking that place where a life had ended. He stood there looking at it for a long time, and he still wonders to this day who she was waiting for, and whether on the night he walked past her, she finally found out